Help! Somebody please help me! 911. What's your emergency? There's an alligator attacking my neighbor, Julia Banks. She's trapped in her pool. Please hurry. Stay on the line. Help is on the way. Is she conscious? Is she breathing? I don't know. She's screaming, but then she was underwater. I see blood in the water. Please send someone fast. Julia Banks. In the quiet town of Clearwater Springs, Florida, a backyard sanctuary hid something wild. For 5 years, Julia Banks cared for an alligator named Reef, nursed him from a hatchling into a full-grown predator. What happened that August afternoon would send shockwaves through the community and raise urgent questions about the dangers of raising wild animals in domestic spaces. Welcome to the Animal Quest channel. If you're interested in real stories about humans and the animals that turn on them, subscribe, like, and share. Now let's begin. Julia Banks was 28 years old when she died in Clearwater Springs, a quiet Florida town known more for its citrus groves than wildlife rescues. She was a familiar face, a local hero, even. Julia wasn't just passionate about animals, she lived for them. Orphaned raccoons, abandoned possums, injured egrets, she took them all in. But none had captured her heart quite like the hatchling she found near the edge of the Appalachia River 5 years earlier. It was barely the size of her hand, just 8 inches. Long, with bulging eyes and a soft, striped belly. Most people would have run the other way. Julia scooped it up, wrapped it in a towel, and took it home. She named him Reef. Friends say the bond was instant. Julia joked that he imprinted on her like a duckling, that she was the only mom he'd ever known. She received a special wildlife permit through her animal rehabilitation center, allowing her to keep and care for Reef legally even as he grew. And grow he did. By the time Reef was 3 years old, he was over 5 feet long. By 5 years, he measured nearly 8 feet from snout to tail. People around her noticed. So did the wildlife officers. They warned her. They told her that alligators, no matter how tame they seem, never lose their primal instincts. That food scent territory, these things matter more than love or trust to an apex predator. But Julia wouldn't hear it. To her, Reef wasn't dangerous. He was different. She fed him by hand, swam with him in her backyard pool, even let him nap in the sun beside her feet while she read on the patio. There were photos, so many photos. Social media posts showing Reef resting his head on her lap, videos of him following her voice like a trained dog. People commented. Some were amazed. Others were horrified. She treated Reef like her child. One of her colleagues later said, maybe that was the problem. Still, for 5 years, nothing went wrong until the afternoon it did. She found him in the summer of 2018, half submerged in a mud bank along the Appalachia River, chirping softly for its mother, who was likely gone. The baby gator couldn't have been more than 6 inches long, alone, vulnerable, and unlikely to survive on his own. Reef became Julia's next rescue. But unlike the dozens of creatures she'd rehabilitated and released over the years, she made a different decision with him. Under her wildlife rehabilitation license, she applied for and received a special permit that allowed her to raise and house the young alligator indefinitely. At first, he stayed in a large indoor enclosure fitted with heating lamps and a custom pond. Julia hand-fed him ground turkey mixed with vitamins, gently tapping a spoon against the enclosure wall to teach him feeding cues. She treated the process like raising a baby. Every feeding, every interaction reinforced the idea in her mind that Reef wasn't like other alligators, that he was special, that he knew her. As Reef grew, so did the risks, but Julia didn't see it that way. By the time he was 3 feet long, she had moved him to an outdoor enclosure with a small wading pool. By 4 feet, that pool was replaced with a converted in-ground backyard pool that Reef used freely. Julia swam with him regularly. She claimed the activity helped build trust. To her, Reef's calm movements, his predictable responses, and his attachment to her voice were signs of a bond, a real one. But to trained wildlife officials, those same behaviors were something else entirely, habitual conditioning. Still, Reef never showed signs of aggression. Julia could touch him, float beside him, even stroke his jaw. He would close his eyes and stay still, as though comforted by her presence. He knew her scent. He responded to her voice. In 5 years, he had never snapped, hissed, or lashed out. So it was easy, too easy, for Julia to believe that he saw her as family. For 5 years, Reef lived alongside Julia, appearing tame and affectionate. But nature doesn't forget, and Reef was growing. By 2023, he weighed close to 300 pounds. His powerful tail alone could knock a grown adult off their feet. He had outgrown his original enclosure, and his feeding schedule had changed to accommodate his size. Whole chickens, frozen rats, fish tossed from a distance. Never hand-fed anymore, Julia still entered the pool with him, still floated beside him in silence, whispering reassurances, smiling as if nothing had changed. But it had. She just didn't realize it yet. By the summer of 2022, Reef had reached an imposing 7.5 feet in length. His body was thick with muscle, his snout wide, and his eyes, once small and blinking with dependence, had grown cold and watchful. Despite his size, Julia continued to treat him as if he were still that vulnerable hatchling she had pulled from the swamp. She swam with him, talked to him, fed him whole chickens, which she now snapped up with thunderous force. People started to worry. Wildlife officers, neighbors, even close friends. Kenneth Lyles, a veteran field officer with the Florida Wildlife Commission, visited her property after a routine inspection raised flags. He'd heard about Reef from other officers. He was one of those names that got whispered in staff meetings. The pet Gator lady. In his official report, Lyles made a note of Reef's size, enclosure conditions, and behavioral cues. But what stood out to him most was Julia's attitude. At some point, he told her flatly, instincts kick in. He's not a dog, Julia. She smiled at him like she'd heard it all before. To her, warnings were based in fear, not fact. She insisted she knew Reef better than anyone else ever could. That he was calm, predictable, safe. Neighbors began to report incidents. They heard loud hissing during feeding time. One man saw Reef rear up and slam his tail against the fence when Julia approached with a bucket. A teenage girl walking her dog past the property claimed she saw Reef lunge toward the chain-link enclosure, jaws wide. Still, Julia refused to acknowledge the change. Online, she posted a video clip of Reef resting in the sun beside the pool while she sat cross-legged just a few feet away. In the video, she laughed softly and said, "He's misunderstood. People just don't get him. He's not dangerous. He just needs trust." The comment section told a different story. People begged her to be careful, to stop swimming with him, to let him go. Some told her she was risking her life. Others called it a ticking time bomb. Julia didn't respond. But the warnings had been given clearly, repeatedly. And in just a few weeks, they would prove to be more than justified. On the sunny afternoon of August 18, 2023, the air was thick with humidity, the kind that clings to your skin and makes every movement sticky. Julia Banks stepped out into her backyard carrying a pool skimmer and bucket. But water in her pool was clouded with algae, and like she did countless times before, she planned to clean it. Reef was nearby, his massive body floating just beneath the surface near the pool's shallow end. Normally, he was calm during these cleanings, sometimes curious, sometimes indifferent. But today, there was a strange stillness about him. His eyes were half closed, but his muscles tense beneath the water, barely moving. Julia eased into the pool, ignoring the faint warning signs. She was confident she had done this 100 times before. Unbeknownst to her, Reef was agitated. He had been fed less than an hour earlier. A large meal that had left him full and restless. His natural hunting instincts were stirring beneath that calm exterior. As Julia dipped the skimmer into the water, Reef shifted suddenly. His powerful tail swept beneath her legs. Before she could react, his jaws clamped around her right leg. The force was terrifying. And instinctively, Reef began what wildlife experts call a *** death roll ***, a violent spinning maneuver designed to incapacitate prey. Julia's screams filled the backyard, desperate and raw. She fought to break free, but Reef's grip was unrelenting. Panic overtook the quiet afternoon as neighbors heard the commotion and dialed 911. She thought it was just another cleaning, another ordinary moment spent caring for the creature she loved. But Reef had other plans. At around 3:15 p.m., Clara Monroe, Julia's next-door neighbor, was tending to her garden when a sudden, shocking sound cut through the usual afternoon calm. It started as frantic thrashing in the pool next door, followed quickly by desperate screams. Clara dropped her gardening tools and ran toward the fence, her heart pounding. She peered over and saw the nightmare unfolding in slow motion. Reef, the massive alligator she had known from a distance, was thrashing violently in the pool. Julia was struggling, her limbs flailing as Reef lunged forward and clamped down hard on her right thigh. The force was unimaginable, a crushing grip of raw power. Without hesitation, Reef began the death roll, a terrifying primal behavior alligators use to subdue and incapacitate prey. The pool water churned violently as Reef spun her body underwater, pulling Julia under the surface again and again. Julia's screams echoed off the nearby houses, desperate and filled with terror. "Help, please," she cried out, but the murmur of panic was quickly swallowed by the roaring violence beneath the water. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for her phone. Her voice cracked as she dialed 911. "There's blood in the pool," Clara said urgently, her voice trembling with fear. "She's not moving. Please hurry. Someone's getting attacked by an alligator inside the pool." Reef dragged Julia toward the deep end, his jaws locked tight around her leg. The water darkened with streaks of blood as the struggle continued beneath the surface. Julia's movements slowed, the fight draining from her body. Neighbors gathered in disbelief, watching helplessly from behind fences and windows. The flashing lights of emergency vehicles soon arrived, sirens piercing the tense atmosphere. Rescue teams prepared for the worst, but the damage was already done. Julia Banks' life was slipping away in the murky waters of her own backyard pool. Within 8 minutes of Clara's frantic 911 call, the first emergency vehicles screeched onto the quiet streets of Clearwater Springs. Paramedics rushed through the backyard gate alongside officers from the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. The scene was chaotic, neighbors standing frozen, the pool's once clear water now murky with splashes of blood and disturbed sediment. Wildlife officers moved quickly, wielding long poles designed to control dangerous animals. Reef thrashed violently near the deep end, his powerful tail slamming against the pool's edge as officers attempted to push him away from the motionless figure in the water. It was a tense, dangerous dance. One misstep could have cost another life. Paramedics waded cautiously into the pool area and pulled Julia Banks from the water. Her body was limp, pale, and covered in cuts and bruises. The damage to her right leg was severe, deep lacerations and crush injuries marked by the unmistakable bite patterns of a large alligator. Alongside the trauma was the unmistakable sign of drowning, waterlogged lungs and labored breathing. Despite their rapid response and frantic efforts to stabilize her, Julia remained unconscious. She was rushed by ambulance to the hospital, where trauma surgeons fought to save her life. But the injuries were overwhelming. Hours later, in a sterile hospital room filled with the hum of machines and whispered prayers, Julia Banks was pronounced dead. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the community, but the crisis was not yet over. With Julia gone, Reef was captured using tranquilizer darts administered by wildlife officers. The massive alligator, once a beloved pet, was now a lethal danger. Following state wildlife protocols for dangerous captive alligators involving human fatalities, Reef was euthanized shortly after capture. The once tame reptile was put down, closing a heartbreaking chapter on a relationship that had gone tragically wrong. The news of Julia Banks' death spread quickly through Clearwater Springs and beyond, sending waves of shock and grief through the tight-knit community. Friends, neighbors, and animal lovers struggled to comprehend how such a tragedy could happen to someone so devoted to wildlife. In the days that followed, candlelight vigils were held in her memory. Mourners gathered by the local park, clutching photos of Julia smiling with Reef when he was just a hatchling. Tears flowed freely as stories were shared of her kindness, her passion, and her unwavering commitment to the creatures others feared. Former co-workers from the Regional Wildlife Rehabilitation Center spoke openly about Julia's dedication, but also the growing concerns they had kept to themselves. "She loved him, yes," said Sarah Middleton, a fellow rescuer, voice trembling with emotion. "But somewhere along the way, she forgot what he really was, a wild animal. No matter how close you think you are, the instincts don't just disappear." That warning echoed throughout the community and into broader conversations about the risks and responsibilities of keeping exotic pets. Reef's death and Julia's tragic passing reignited fierce debate over Florida's exotic animal laws. Animal rights advocates and wildlife officials called for stricter regulations, emphasizing the dangers of keeping powerful predators in residential settings. Experts weighed in on national news programs and panels, stressing a vital truth: wild animals don't lose their instincts. Domestication is a myth, stated Dr. Marcus Lanning, a leading herpetologist. You can't train nature out of an alligator's DNA. These creatures are built for survival, and when they reach adulthood, they revert to their natural behaviors, often with deadly consequences. The tragedy forced many to reconsider their assumptions about human-wildlife relationships, especially when it comes to powerful predators like alligators. Julia's story became a somber lesson, a cautionary story of love, trust, and the unforgiving realities of nature. Animal behaviorist Dr. Leah Torres, who has spent over 2 decades studying reptilian behavior, offers insight into what likely happened between Julia and Reef in those final devastating moments. Alligators are territorial animals by nature, Dr. Torres explains. When Reef reached full size, over 7 feet and hundreds of pounds, his instincts to defend his space intensified. Julia, no matter how familiar she seemed to him, became a perceived threat in his territory. She points to the timing of the attack as a crucial factor. Alligators exhibit specific feeding-related behaviors, including increased aggression shortly after eating or when anticipating food. Julia entered the pool after Reef had been fed recently. This is a dangerous moment because the animal's hunger may be satisfied, but its territorial instincts and irritability are heightened. Dr. Torres stresses that some warning signs, like Reef's hissing, tail slapping, and lunging, are subtle cues humans can easily misinterpret or overlook, especially when there is an emotional bond involved. Humans tend to anthropomorphize these animals, seeing affection or calmness where wildness still rules. But the reality is that wild predators operate on instinct and survival, The boundaries between human and animal must be respected. No matter how close you believe you are, you can never fully control or predict a predator's actions. Dr. Torres concludes with a cautionary note. This tragedy underscores the importance of respecting wildlife for what it truly is: powerful, unpredictable, and wild. Emotional bonds do not change that fundamental truth. Julia Banks dedicated her life to saving wildlife, but in trying to tame nature, she lost her life to it. Her memorial, surrounded by flickering candles and photographs capturing moments of compassion and connection, stands as a solemn reminder of the fragile line between human and wild. If you're moved by Julia's story, share this video and help spread awareness about the dangers of exotic pet ownership. Subscribe now to our channel for more true stories from the wild, and don't miss our next video where we dive deep into the risks behind keeping dangerous animals as pets. Thank you for watching. Stay safe.